Hey everybody, welcome back to At Arm's Reach. I'll be focusing the next couple breakdowns on an approach that I use before a fight, which provides an analytical step-by-step process through which I can analyze mistakes I've made or decisions that I might want to change in the future. I think having a process like this is beneficial for newer players as they venture into PvP, not only because it gives you isolated steps to analyze after a fight, but also gives you a checklist of points to think about before a fight so you are more prepared as you start that engagement. I've broken the process that I use down into 4 steps. First, moving proactively. Next, gathering information. Third, preparing a plan. And then lastly, acting decisively on that plan. In this breakdown, I'll be focusing on moving proactively and some of the specifics that I think are important to keep in mind as you do so. The clip I decided to focus on for this breakdown starts while I'm sitting at a Plex trying to find different ships in space. As I'm looking at D-Scan, both a Comet and Incursus land on top of me, so I decide to go inside the Plex and warp away. Most of the time when making a video, I start a clip just before the fight. However, for this series of breakdowns, I'm going to be focusing much more on the decisions before a fight than the actual engagement itself. Here I spend about a minute warping around trying to determine if the Comet and Incursus are together, if they might be fighting, or if they're neutral parties that just happen to land at the same time. This uncertainty will play a large part in how I approach this engagement and impact some of the decisions that I make. However, as a result, I do emphasize heavily moving proactively and creating space to allow time for that uncertainty. Whenever you are uncertain of groups in the area or ships in space, it's important to create more distance and more time to allow yourself to prepare more accurately, as well as allowing yourself the opportunity to escape if needed. After a short time in space trying to determine the intentions of the Comet and Incursus, I return to the novice outpost and go inside. Now this is where I can start explaining what I mean by moving proactively. Upon entering the complex, I align to a celestial. The reason I use the word proactively is because I want to emphasize that you are not only moving away from something, in this case the beacon, but it's also important to keep in mind that you should be moving toward something else, in this case a celestial that I can warp out to if needed. Due to the uncertainty of fighting a potential group of people, as well as a lack of information about what kind of fit they have or their propulsion system, I want to create as much time and space by pulling range off the beacon as possible. Now in other situations, it might be more important to get right on the beacon, for instance when facing a kiting frigate that you want to catch on warp-in, or when facing a potential kite frigate you may want to get much farther away in order to ensure your escape. In either situation, moving proactively benefits you much more than sitting around 5 to 10 kilometers where you have very little time to gather information or react and escape if needed. Now with the Comet coming in, it's very clear that he's interested in a fight. I have created enough space to check his weapon system and look at his speed to determine propulsion system. Having moved around 40 kilometers off the beacon while still remaining aligned to a celestial gives me a multitude of options while I assess the situation and prepare a plan. I also use this time to check D-Scan for other pilots that may be joining the fight, and incorporate that information into my course of action. Now by the time the engagement actually starts, I have a wealth of information about my opponent, a firm grasp of what's around me in space, and a good idea of potential opponents that may be joining the fight. I have a clear plan to defeat my opponent, as well as a potential escape route if things aren't going my way. From this point on, the fight itself is relatively simple. I have control over my opponent's speed and distance through the advantages of my fit. I project more damage to a longer range than my opponent. As such, the range that I've established supplements my relatively light tank, allowing me to fight comfortably within this range. Looking at relative distance from the beacon, we're now about 75 kilometers away from the warp-in point, so any additional opponents that would be joining the fight would have to burn that extra range to join the engagement. During that time, I could either finish off my current opponent or take steps necessary in order to pull range and warp away to the celestial I'm already aligned to. And all of this flexibility is possible because I chose to move proactively, creating distance and time before my opponent was ever on the field. I hope everyone found this breakdown useful and informational. If you have any questions or would like points of clarification, please leave a comment in the comments section below, or mail me in-game. Next breakdown, we'll take some time to look at some of the information provided in-game, as well as some tools and resources outside of game that you can use to your benefit when preparing for an engagement.